this is the last session. We're entitling it Implications for CGIAR 2030 Research and Innovation Strategy. It'll last about 40 minutes or so, and we've got a very distinguished panel here that I'd like to introduce. So first of all, Patrick Caron, who's the CGIAR System Board Vice Chair and Vice President for International Affairs at the University of Montpellier. And I'm apologising for Patrick because he's got to leave early for another important meeting. But anyway, he's here for a little while with us. Next to Patrick's Nicoline Haan, who's the Gender Equality, Youth and Social Inclusion Impact Platform Director at CGIAR. Next to Nicoline is Sonja Vermeulen, who's the Managing Director of Genetic Innovation, CGIAR. And next to Sonja is Tollervey, who's the SIMEC Chair, a System Council member, and advisor at the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office, FCDO, in the UK, and fellow Scot. We're waiting for Abousabaa, the CGIAR Regional Director of CWANA and Director General of ICARDA, who's going to pop in as soon as he's able to. All right then, so the idea here is to have a little bit of a reflection of what we heard today. And I have one question for each of the panel members in turn, and then we can open it up to the audience for some general questions. I've got a few more follow-up questions in case people are too tired to think of anything else, but I don't think that's going to happen. So first of all, Patrick, I'm going to ask you, because you might leave us soon. So the general question for everyone is, from the presentations and discussions that you've heard today, what do you think is your key sort of takeaway message? What really struck you today? Your light bulb moment, if you like, Patrick. Yeah, and panel members, can you use these microphones? Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yes, it's okay. It's okay. Well, thank you very much, and very happy to be here and to comment. I would share three key messages, and we can develop later, but I'll make it short to begin with. The first is time has changed. If we compare 20th century and 21st century, there are many differences, but one of them is that the social lift that is based on economic growth is not sufficient to ensure sustainable development. And that's a major change in paradigm and in mindset. And it's not just market is something serious, and inclusion should be delegated to charity, is to take inclusion very seriously as one of the major issues to ensure sustainable development. So inclusion, not just a charity issue, a very serious issue, and this has obviously major consequences for the CGIAR portfolio. My number two key message is building upon what Sonja said this morning. When it comes to inclusion for research institutions, there are very many different dimensions. One is a normative goal. It's an impact area. It's something we look at doing. Another one, which is completely different, is which partners are we working with and for. The third one is what is the academic exercise about inclusion, how to enlighten what is taking place, and it's a research activity. The fourth one that I noticed is innovation is very specific when it comes to inclusion. We talked about gender-sensitive varieties, for example. And the fifth one is how to consider gender within a research institution, which has implication for human resources and capacity development. These are completely different, and we have to differentiate that. And then my last key message is if we really want to take it seriously and to boost research practices, there is an institutional responsibility to do it. It's not just, it's about having early career researchers. Thank you very much. That was great. But it's also how to shape the institution through human resource policies, through incentives, through programming at the highest institutional level. And this is an institutional responsibility. I would just add a very short comment about, I think it was Gildas who said that about the agricultural sector would not be attractive to young people. Well, maybe in one place, but you will agree with me that it's very contextual. And it very much depends on the place and the time and the period. So we have to also look at how we connect contextual knowledge with heuristic knowledge and with theories, and this is what a research institution is looking at.
Thanks, and thanks for all the wonderful conversation today. It brought up a lot of thoughts to me. I just wanted to put about 3 big ones. First, the very big one. I mean, I think it's amazing that we're actually in this room discussing this at this level. A lot of the gender stuff up to now has often been at household level, intra-household decision making, etc. To actually get, you know, great minds to think about megatrends and what that means for gender equality is amazing. So really appreciate that. Then one comment about youth and social inclusion. So the Gender Impact Platform, and gender, I will point out, stands for generating evidence and new directions for equitable results. So it's not only women, but we now are actually moving more and more towards also working on youth and social inclusion. And so I'm really happy to hear, because we are developing 2 positions papers, one position paper on youth and one position paper on social inclusion and how the CG needs to deal with it. So that's our aim. We're getting there, but because one of the things that I noticed, and especially on one of the presentations on youth, there has not been much research on youth. I mean, there has been a lot of trying things out, giving, you know, saying we need entrepreneurs, but there's not been much real research or theoretical thinking about youth. And so one of the things that's really interesting when we're working on this, you know, youth are either described as, wow, aggressive, assertive, and entrepreneurial, or on the bad track. They're horrible, whatnot. So how do we, and actually youth are usually mostly in the middle ground. So how do we deal with that? So that's, like I say, one of the things we're actually trying to do. On youth as well, and I'm learning this from gender, first of all, they are different issues. So it's not like we're gonna have whoever asked that, you know, are you gonna tell me how to do youth in the future? There are different issues. But a lot, it's still, even in youth, there are gender issues. Most people, when they talk about youth, think about men or younger men. They don't think about girls. And in agriculture, and this goes back a little bit too, it's very important. You have so many girl brides in agriculture. Why do we have girl brides in agriculture? To sell off the labor, to get money for seeds. That is an issue, and that's something we're not dealing with and hardly anybody's dealing with. So that's one of the things we want to talk about. On youth as well, we often talk about, well, we have to make agriculture sexy, right? Then we'll get them in, right? I mean, but you'll hear the younger people, we've had several conversations, younger people say, don't need to be sexy, just make it profitable. Logical, right? So maybe there's something there. Maybe the system is just not profitable. And maybe that's a bigger story. Instead of us constantly trying to fix the youth again, let's fix the system as well. Let's figure that one out. So then my second big point is underlying root causes. I love that we're discussing that. And some people said there's not much research out there. There is. Norms are one of them. That's one of the underlying causes. I mean, norms are there. I mean, when you talk about COVID, I mean, the norm was that, and this is more a Western version, but I really think this is one of those cases, when they decided to close schools and send all those kids back home, it was usually probably men who were on that panel. It wasn't women because women knew the implication. And so the norm was that women are not in those decision-making spots. So let's think about that. I mean, so I think there is actually quite... Inequality is growing again, absolutely there, and especially on climate change. one of the things we've been lucky to do through some funding is to actually look at where are hot spots of inequality, agriculture, and climate change. And we've been working with quite a lot of African governments to identify those spots. Because we all know we don't have enough money to do everything. So let's at least identify those spots, help the governments invest in those spots so those inequalities don't grow. Because once they grow, it's much more difficult to get them back to up to speed again. I mean, we know that, for instance, from my research, you know, if an animal disease comes through a community, your whole herd disappears. It's very difficult to get your herd back up. So let's stop those inequalities from growing and let's target those areas. So that's all my comments.
Thank you. Sonja.
Thanks very much. My light bulb moment today was when Vicky Wilde quoted Melinda French Gates saying, "More than empowerment, women need power." And that's actually just language, right? Empowerment part's the same thing, but it's important language because it draws our attention to the fact that the change needed isn't in those disempowered poor women and that we need to target them and get them to change. The fact is we all need to change. It's all of us, our institutions, our systems, and the change is a matter for absolutely everybody. Now, I do think this has important implications for the way that we work all of the time. So in our work in CGIAR, and then every one of us who works in agricultural research in the room, one of them is not being afraid to work with other sectors. We have to do that. If we're going to get to what Nicoline is talking about and beginning to deal with underlying factors, with the drivers, with the norms, with the deeply embedded social institutions we have, that's the only way forward. And then the other part for me is from that is, as we're all trying to change, this is not an end state of perfect, transformed agri-food, land, water systems that we're going to reach in 10 years' time. As we know from real experience, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and what we need to try and make it is 3 steps forward before the 1 step back. But accept that that transformation is just a constant fight, a constant struggle that we need to be involved in. Thank you.
They're all
Okay. Oh yeah, got it, right. Okay, so what did I hear today? Well, I thought there was in this session, we went from a small randomized control trial looking at communicating with women to megatrends, to the global gloom descending. And I thought that sort of sums up the CGI really. I mean, it sort of tries to deal with everything at every scale, everywhere. And actually, as an organization, it is quite well set up to do that. I mean, you know, what we had was a really great example of an experimental evaluation, challenging assumptions that are right through the initiatives from top to bottom. If we give women information, they'll be empowered and they'll have. If I had £1 for every research proposal or project document I'd read that claimed that, including many from the CG, we persist with these myths, you know, and the evidence isn't challenged. And the discussion we had this morning, when you raised the question of, you know, embedding capacity, you know, the work that Caron McCurs did with SPIA to try and test the theories of change in the initiatives. That was really about challenging people around the assumptions they were putting into their research programs about how actions here lead to change there and lead to impact over there. And I think the CG has a really important role in questioning the way in which it makes these assumptions. I recall very well reading the CRP proposal on fisheries, which claimed that giving people more information about stock density in inland waters would lead to policy changes in government and lead to sustainable fisheries management. This is complete nonsense. Everybody who's worked in fisheries is nonsense, and yet we still see these lazy assumptions coming through. So I think there's a really great, important role the CG can play in connecting up experimental evaluation evidence to policy, to impact. And as a global organization, it can do that across many spheres and domains, gender being one, but in many other areas. Nutrition's a really great example. And building capacity at different levels within governments and international organizations and in ours to do that, to deliver those impacts, and to do it across diverse contexts, because we know what works here won't work there. You know, when we were doing the best buys analysis in FCDO with Rachel Glenister, who was our chief economist at that time, you know, one of the things she challenged us is you can't come into these analyses of what represents the best value for money in development spending for FCDO or DFID in those days by saying, well, it sort of works some places and it doesn't work others. You've got to be more specific. You've got to understand the context in which this works. Why didn't it work there and why did it work over there? And so much of the work that we do, we're just describing what's happened. We're not evaluating this properly. So I think there's a really key role. The other thing I'd say about today, and especially that last session, rather gloomy session on megatrends, is agility. We've mentioned this a few times. The CG has to be more agile. One of the first meetings I ever went to in the CG was on Montpellier with Ken Kassman was the chair of the ISPC, I think, in those days, yeah. And Ken went up and he gave us, at the end of the session, we just signed up to 5-year CRPs. And Ken put up 2 slides. One was Deepwater Horizon and one was Fukushima. Both happened within a month of each other. Before those 2 events, the world energy supply was coming from offshore deepwater oil drilling and nuclear power. And after those 2 events in 1 month, everything had changed. And his question was, how is the CG signed up to 5-year CRPs, agile to respond to big things that happen and has to respond to? And then what did we hear? We heard a pandemic, which took everybody by surprise, though perhaps it shouldn't have, but it certainly did. And then a major war, again, took everyone's surprise, perhaps it shouldn't have. Major shock to global food prices. And the CG was scrabbling around. We were scrabbling around to find $1 million here and $500,000 there to fund some of the major modelling work that the CG needed to do in order to support the global response to this, to understand the impacts on developing countries, to support effective policy responses. So the organisation has got to be more agile. And that means we can't put everything into, you know, fire and go 3-year research programs. We have to think about what capacity is needed in the organisation to respond to these emerging issues. So I learned those 2 things, those 2 sessions this afternoon I thought were really great, and they really challenged us to what we think the CG is and what it should be doing in the future.
Thank you, Alan. Ali, we're answering the question of what was your sort of main takeaway or light bulb moment? Yeah.
Thank you very much, and my apology, I had to step out for an emergency to handle, so my sincere apology for that. Okay, I was actually, you know, quite happy to see the transition from the micro to the macro, and the mega trends are so impressive, and they provide us with the evidence about many of the aspects we know. I mentioned at the very beginning the perfect storm and the vortex that was there, the population, the climate change, the poverty, the conflict, and all of these things combined, which really makes it extremely difficult, not just for the drylands or for the Middle East or CWANA, it's much more broader than that across the world. So thank you so much for ISDC for having initiated this work. I strongly believe that it should really be disseminated much broader for the greater majority of our scientists to benefit from it. My second point is the issue of youth that appears to be under-researched and not receiving sufficient focus, not from within the CG, but more broadly. And I personally believe we need to have additional emphasis on them, because this is really where the transformation can happen. The CG has been generating technologies and innovations for the past 50 years. The fastest way for the uptake of these innovations would be through creating opportunities for the youth. And of course, more broadly, the most productive workforce. And some of the organizations like the World Bank and African Bank, and I'm sure many other organizations like David and others put the whole issue of employment and being able to create opportunities for the young ones is quite high on their agenda. And I think in the CGIAR we can provide those innovations, those technologies, and the policy-based evidence to the decision makers for them to be able to make those adjustments. I very much sympathize with your intervention. Thank you so much for bringing so many important and relevant and real issues that we live through in today's world. But I wish to share that I personally believe we are underestimating what the women have been able to do, especially in the like the past 10, 15 years. When you look at a country like Tunisia, a country like Egypt, these two major revolutions that have changed the configuration of the entire Middle East future have been largely driven by the youth and the women. So that is a level of engagement we have never seen in the past. There has been very strong engagement from women, but not at that scale and not to the extent where it has influenced a complete overhaul of two major important nations. My last point is on the 2030 research agenda of the CGIAR. And it's a general comment, not necessarily related to our conversation on gender specifically, but I think given what we are observing across the world and the acceleration of climate change and the widening gap of gender and many other challenges we see across the globe, it may be useful for us to think about stress testing the 2030 research agenda. And the reason I'm saying this, CIMEC, IMI, ICARDA, and a wider group from across the CGIAR are looking at refreshing their strategies. And what we have done is that we've created foresight scenarios and very strong engagement with our partners and foresight groups to try and identify what will be the future for which we need to develop our own research. And the picture that is emerging is quite challenging. It's really quite challenging, especially with regards to climate change and if it's combined with conflict and other considerations. And we're living nowadays, a real life conflict that is potentially affecting the entire world. So it may be for the ISDC to think about some of those issues. I'm just giving some food for thought to make sure that we remain relevant, that we remain ahead of the curve as we continue to deliver the probably great science based on the work of our colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So now we've heard the panel's immediate thoughts. I wondered if anyone had any reflections or questions that they might want to ask at this stage. Is there anyone? So in the front here, Amy. I think it's on, actually, yeah.
Thank you so much for all the amazing things we have learned and heard today. There are so many things to take away. May I ask one question? The environmental researchers at some point of time agreed to do this IPCC. Would that be something, we have been discussing that at the UN Food System Summit and afterwards. Is that something that we could think of for the CG? Did you think about it? Would that be something to do as a flagship thing, which could really bring all this wisdom, all this research together and tell the policymakers what needs to be done urgently? Thank you.
Who would like to take that question? Ali? Yeah. Or you, Patrick?
I don't hold the decision, the final decision on this, but I find the idea to be so interesting. With regards to IPCC, already our scientists from the CGIAR, multiple centers, are making important contributions to these reports. So the knowledge is finding its way, and we are trying to organize ourselves to actually contribute even more in the subsequent stages of the analysis, drawing on the science that we have. But it may be, important for the CG to consider a flagship project, a flagship report that may have a topic that would change, something similar to the World Bank, World Development Report. And I think once we stabilize on some of the internal issues, we could certainly start to look at some of these things. I would certainly carry the idea in the next discussion within SLT, but we have global leaders here, Sonja and others.
I think a flagship report is a great idea. I think CGIAR scientists claiming to carry the, the nub, the body of knowledge that'll inform all policy is an overclaim. So I wouldn't go that far, but would certainly, I think we could make a useful contribution on progress in agricultural innovation.
Patrick.
Well, we had 2 weeks ago an interesting dynamics that took place, and some of the people, the persons, Holger, Sonja, Andrew were present, where we tried to create a safe space to bring together IPCC, IPBS, HLP, the One Health panel, because as you saw on the trends, all the trends are connected to each other. And what we have to go to understand the future is, or to enlighten the future, is to bring all these expert panels together to drive actionable knowledge and produce actionable knowledge. So we probably not need one more panel on one more institution. We have to generate collective intelligence out of the expertise that already exists here and there, and that would address these different issues. CGIAR has been the lead institution to bring all those panels together. They were all present at the highest level, and we foresee a new event in March next year, CGIAR being an organizer, to generate this safe space to create this collective intelligence.
Thank you. I think Andrew has it. Have you got a comment on this particular point or a new question?
Sorry. Yes, just this morning I asked Lottie to accelerate work on a report that would be ready by June, which is a CGIAR brief for policymakers against our 5 impact areas, looking back over our 50-year history, but in particular the most current activity, and will be designed so that our funders can report back to their bosses as to how their investment in the CGIAR is delivering against those goals that their governments have committed to, and against the backdrop of these incredibly urgent converging megatrends.
Thank you. So,
Thanks. I'm Jonathan Wadsworth from the World Bank. As most people know, I've been around the CGIAR for quite a long time. And my sort of light bulb moment is listening to the panel just now. And honestly, I can't remember when I've heard such profound, interesting, wide comments of great impact for me from a group of panelists in the CGIAR. So every one of you who made comments just now said something of great importance, and I hope that we can capture that. So I think my question is, I often feel so drained in CGIAR meetings because we go on and on for a long time, until late at night sometimes, on tiny, minuscule issues of protocol, of process, of who's supposed to approve this, who approves that, what's the order. That may be important business and significant, but it saps one's energy. What you've done for me in this last panel session is given me a lot of hope and a lot of energy, because those profound ideas that you've put forward are alive and well. But we need more opportunities for people to be able to express those and keep them in the canon of the CGIAR constantly. So the question is, how do we do that? You're the folk that have just made some very profound ideas from where you're sitting. But can we take it a stage further? And maybe it comes into what Andrew just mentioned about a flagship publication or things like this. But the challenge to it is how to keep that energy going and those profound thoughts, and not least to question the sacred cows, really, and maybe get rid of a few. Thanks.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks for those nice comments. I'd like to move on to a second question that maybe partly addresses what you're going to say, and Alan actually touched on in his response, and that was how can CGIAR adapt to the ever-increasing speed of megatrends and their spillover effects? You know, how agile can we be, and what sorts of things can we do to adapt? And Patrick, I can ask you to.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Jonathan, for this message of hope, and let's try to continue. I would say I would have three comments for that. The first one is I was very happy to see inclusion or inequity as one of the drivers. It's not just one driver, it's in the same trend, sorry. It's a driver, it's a trend, it's an impact in the same time. And this is because it's at the heart of a vicious circle. And if we look at moving from the 20th century to the 21st again, somehow we are not moving, but we are just saying that food security is not enough. We also have to look at inequity or inclusion security for the future, where the food systems and the agricultural sector has a huge role to play. But what we are looking at with the research portfolio nowadays, if we want to be modern, is not just food security, it's also equity-based security. That's my first one. My second one is that there is, of course that was not the exercise, but we are in the academic world. There is one mega trend that is missing for me when we look at the academic, is the evolution of the academic landscape, which has been huge during the last decade. This has been highlighted by the high-level advisory panel, who show very well that in the emerging countries or the other countries, there was quite a lot of transformation during the last decades. I will not be long, but I've heard the word decolonizing research this morning. And it's very important now as well to not only look at the content of the portfolio, but to also to look at the partnership dimension of the strategy. That means how to do research, of course, but also how to strengthen capacity, how to assume a convening power, bringing all partners together, how to be the custodian of public goods, how to engage in scientific and political diplomacy. These are the basis of the new partnership strategy that we should look at. My third and last one, and I'm sorry that I have to jump out after, is that we know that we don't know. So and we forgot that for a very long time. We were full of certainty, and COVID and Ukrainian and Gaza just show that we cannot know. We cannot know. So of course there are trends, but the future will not be as the trends will say. So the trends just help us to think about the possible future, but we have to think about the plausible future. And to build a new future, we have to think the unthinkable. And this is the role of science. And this is the role science should play. So thank you very much for these trends, and they should help us to build this future, but not forgetting about moving away from those trends.
Thank you. Thank you for your contribution, and sorry you have to go. Who might else want to comment on this question? Alan, you touched on it in your answer. I don't know if you have some ideas behind that, needing to be agile and adapt.
So yeah, I think the question really is, so what's the balance between, we talked about this earlier, Leslie, remember, what's the balance between building core capability and maintaining a focus on high-performing R&D programs? And that most research systems struggle with that. I mean, it's almost like, they're almost like slightly contradictory. I mean, you know, on one hand, you want to build stable, consistent, secure funding to, you know, to build assets and capabilities that you can use to deploy against future demand that you can't quite perceive yet, but you know it's going to happen, and in an unpredictable and way that requires a pivot towards new requests. But you want to, you don't want the organization to become somehow complacent, and so there's an inherent tension there. I think we can see in the CG, there's some really, massively important elements of the program across the whole CGIAR, like the crop breeding genetic innovation pipeline, which requires consistent, long-term, steady investment, refocusing, rethinking about what it does, constantly, assessing its way of working, bringing in new technologies, harnessing the capabilities that exist elsewhere around, new genomics and big data analytics. You want those things to run forward, but you also need the capability in things like, modeling and foresighting and metrics to be able to pivot. I mean, the work that IFPRI did around Ukraine, Russia, and then COVID, but Ukraine, Russia was only capable because they had the capacities already in place in countries. They had their models running, they had these GC models running in countries, and were able to plug in additional information and start generating analyses and plausible scenarios that we could use to influence policy. So in a sense, it's striking that balance. I have never been a fan of. I can't almost believe myself saying this actually, but I think there's a strong limitation on competitive research funding, and we saw that in the analysis that was done by the UK government of the Global Challenge Research Fund, this big flagship program of international development research funded by ICARDA, the BBSRC in the UK, and it generated lots of really high quality research, unfocused, unstrategic, dispersed across many partners, classic, but lots of applications. The alternative is something much less agile, not bringing in great science, but is more clunky, more sort of institutional. There's a balance there somewhere, but we struggle to find it, and I think that's the big challenge for the CG, to come up with a model that really builds on its core strengths, strengthens its assets and capabilities, but is still agile, responsive, and generating really high quality outputs. So no answer from me, but let's...
I just asked Lesley if I could come in because I was expecting to want to really disagree with Alan's last comment around agility. But now I want to really support this and also develop this a bit. So, when major weather events hit, and we all want fantastic weather forecasting services, they're only there if we've been investing in our MET departments over the previous years. And I think the same applies in CGIAR. So the investment needs to be in Yo and his team's ability to keep those models running, keep the forecasting going, similarly the gene banks and what they do. But the test of them, Alan, is that ability as soon as that new unexpected crisis hits from nowhere, how fast can they pivot to respond to that? And I think for the test for us in CGIAR is when we say investing in those assets, we're not investing them as steady state kind of infrastructural things that never change. It's continuous improvement and really being quite methodologically adventurous. So just to give you the kind of stuff out of the breeding, I mean, what we're actually trying to do, we are mission driven in our breeding, and our mission is to increase the rate of genetic gain in farmers' fields. So we're talking about not just yield, but around the nutritional quality, around things that women care about, like the cooking time I mentioned this morning, et cetera, et cetera. And the other piece is the rate of turnover. We just want to get varieties into farmers' hands and into their fields far faster than ever before. We want to decrease the age of the average variety in their field by 25% in this business period. So that takes action at every level. I mean, it takes gender work, understanding what women want, what they need, how they access those seeds. And then it also takes a whole bunch of technical stuff in our breeding. I mean, we're doing trials of varieties in whole new ways now. This tricot method, for those of you who are not familiar with it, what we're doing is instead of field trials in a limited number of places, sending out seeds to 10,000 farmers and asking them to answer 3 questions about it. You know, it's just a methodological advance that we need. So I think that's the challenge to us, you know, really focus on what we do best, where we can contribute. You're right, Alan, it's not everything, but constantly push ourselves to do it better. Thank you.
Nicoline, yeah.
I want to take it a little bit on a different level because I do agree with all of that. So, and again, this is coming straight off of a conference where we had 600 gender researchers. Don't underestimate having a group like that together to leapfrog things either, because all of a sudden people are talking together and figuring out, hey, this might be important, that might be important. Don't underestimate communications, because I think in a lot of cases being agile also means understanding what you have in your pocket. And I mean, we have a huge amount of amazing gender research going on in the CG, but understanding that and making sure that everybody understands that and that we can jump in when and if needed. So I think that's for me, I think, quite important. The other one as well, is when you're talking about agility, I think unpacking power a little bit faster might help as well.
No, you.
Okay. I have one question, if you allow me, and one recommendation. The question to ISDC as part of the work on megatrends. One of the challenges I see as I go through literature and as I discuss with our scientists within the CG, even beyond ICARDA, is that there are a lot of projections and foresight work about what's going to happen in the future with numbers and, very, very, important facts and figures that causes everybody to worry. My question is, I personally believe there is going to be a significant shift and advancement in science and innovation that would eventually help us mitigate many of these things. So my question is, within that mega trends analysis, whether you have come across some indication about what I'm just, is my hypothesis correct? Is it indeed going to happen, or there's still mismatch, simply focus on what's going to happen without paying enough attention to what we will eventually be able to manage? My second point is, I mentioned this morning, we will need another planet Earth by the year 2050 if we continue to consume resources the way we are consuming it right now. So within the CGIAR, I personally believe we need to have step change in the way we conduct our research, in the way we design our methods, and the way we seek the outcomes out of this. If we continue to advance at the same historical trends we've had in the past, with some very good advancements on the crop breeding and acceleration and this and that, it needs to really happen across the entire board. We're still working on water, drip irrigation, sprinkler irrigation, the same stuff that I used to do when I graduated from university, and I will not tell you how many years ago, so that you don't know my age, but in any case, I think there is a step change in the areas of research we do, how we do it, and the outcomes we are seeking. This is deviating a little bit from the gender topic, but I did not want to lose the opportunity with having our ISDC, the thought leaders, and many of our donors, as well as some of our global directors in the room. Thank you for the opportunity to share these thoughts.
Thank you. I mean, there's no doubt there'll be huge, or are currently huge advances in science and technology that will really impact in the next 5 years, particularly around genetic innovation and all the data that's coming through and the predictive models and so on. But I don't know if anyone from the Megatrends team want to pick that up about new advances, or perhaps we can do that another time because we're getting late and it's probably time to wrap up. So I don't know, is anyone from the audience wanting a final question, or shall we just...
Just to reassure you, Ali, that's a question that we take very seriously. We take it on notice because there's definitely not enough time to discuss that now. But what we reported here today were the preliminary results for one impact area. So I hope that in the final report that will be covered, will be much clearer. And absolutely, there are some very important scientific breakthroughs that need to be taken into account.
Okay, thank you. Well, in the interest of time, I'm going to just say thank you so much to the panel for a really rich discussion, which I'm sure will carry on over the next few days if we